chance to look at it. And so I didn't realize that it was affecting us as much as it was going to. Of course, I had a couple meetings. I was out and about, and I did notice that there was pretty good wind that day, but not as we saw for the next 12 hours, it seemed like. When it came at 11 o'clock, I started heading back to my office. It's like, oh, it's in Dave's jurisdiction, no big deal. It's about 8 miles away. Got 36 to protect us. It's in grass. Tall grass, of course. Dry grass, yes. But it's in grass. No big deal. And that turned out to be the wrong thing to think about, basically. But it turned very quickly. It hit in Superior about 12:30. Hit Louisville about 12:45. I was helping a little bit in Superior. I jumped over into Louisville right after that and stayed for the rest of the day, the night, and the next couple of days. So I think the resources were thin, of course. I think the predictions were good. It's just that we didn't get them. I didn't get them in a timely fashion. There's a way that I can try to get those better next time to give the incident commanders and the firefighters on the ground, like Chief B said, that information that really will help us try to fight this. And I say try to fight this. I've been trying to tell people that in a normal structure fire, we have 20 firefighters that are attacking this fire. That day, I had 500 homes on fire. I don't have enough firefighters in the Denver metro area to try to predict or to try to stop this. And it was the wind that eventually stopped around 6, 7, 8 o'clock. And that's when I finally got a relief and said, okay, now we can make a stop. But it was house to house to house. It was the way we build neighborhoods. It's the way the materials were made. It's the education, not only just the general public and the scientists and the congressmen and so on, but it's the firefighters. I think maybe Director Morgan can speak of this, is we've never had this situation that we've learned. We've never predicted, hey, we're going to throw this fire. It's going to be tall grass, really dry. We're going to make 70 miles an hour constant for 8 hours or so. Oh, we're going to put some 100-mile-an-hour winds on that too, and we're going to throw you in a situation. And what would you do? I don't know, and I've been doing this for about 40 years. I've never had that situation. I've never gone through that situation, and I think probably the biggest takeaway is everyone's learned from this, from the scientists to the firefighters to the general public. I think we're all learning, and we're just lucky that only 2 people perished that day. So I'll stop at that point.
Great, thank you guys so much. That is a great leadway into Director Mike Morgan from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control.
That's a big name. Thanks. Mike Morgan, Division of Fire Prevention and Control. A couple of comments just about the structure. My role and responsibilities as it relates to these types of events is that my job is to come and help these folks and provide resources to these folks when these large fires escalate and exceed their capability. And that's how the statutes are structured. That it's the fire chief to the sheriff to the director of the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. So we bring different resources to the table. I want to start by saying, to put this in context, as kind of been alluded to, is there's 64 counties in Colorado, a lot of them along the Front Range. Boulder County is probably, if not the most prepared, one of the most prepared counties to be prepared to deal with a catastrophic event. They have very talented and gifted people that do that every day. And as this event kind of escalated, and as I was, my office is in Lakewood, and I was watching the plume and hearing the different things happening, my phone started blowing up. The normal channels, if you will, Boulder County is very, as I've said, robust in their capabilities and their resources. We've joked, that their resources, they don't need any more engines. You can't throw a rock and hit an engine. But all of a sudden, this event is taking place. And it was, what can you do to provide assistance beyond that local or regional mutual aid system that's very robust here? We put the call out through what we call a search program. It's a work in progress. It started in 2021, actually 20, but we started this project. We're building on it as we go, but we were able to bring in about another 57 engines, I believe, from 47 different fire agencies to provide that support. I think some of the challenges that we were really faced with and the support we normally provide, Colorado is the only state in the nation that has a multi-mission aircraft program, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But it's really the technology pieces for early detection and intelligence using a partnership we started with Sierra Nevada Corporation and providing information to decision makers on the ground of, the heat sensors we can see through the smoke and the decision-making process. As was alluded to, 70-mile-an-hour winds, 100-mile-an-hour gusts, you don't fly any aircraft in that. To the technology piece, which I'm not a smart enough guy to be very technical, but I know that's our future. We have to leverage that. We implemented what we call the Fire Guard program, which California was the first state to do it in 2019. We started our program in 2020. That program is now providing intelligence services through multiple sources in a partnership with the DoD to provide mapping and this near real-time updates. Chiefs that all kind of got together and we put together what's called a facilitated learning analysis, which has historically been done around wildland fires. And so we brought in a team from the U.S. Forest Service and we provided the support to help do this. What happened, let the firefighters tell their story, non-judgmental of it, but what are the things that can be learned? And then we're taking that to the next level because, as we've already said, this was not your traditional wildland urban interface event. This was a grass fire that turned into an urban conflagration. And while we sit here and we say that was a fluke event, right? None of us have seen this in our careers. However, how many thousands of communities are there along the front range of the Rocky Mountains coming down through Canada and the United States that are subject to Chinook winds that we see this and you go, this is not an anomaly. This is something we need to be thinking about preparing for in the future. And what are the things that we can do around that? Technology is a big piece of that. Partnerships and relationships are a big piece of that. I think expanding beyond, which you had a lot of conversations about, recognizing it's a fire year, it's not a fire season. We're not supposed to be fighting fire in Colorado on December 30th. We're supposed to be skiing and building snowmen in Boulder, Colorado, and that's not what we're doing. So we're bringing in, not as rushed, but we're partnering with a lot from the science perspective with Underwriter Laboratories, the Fire Safety Research Institute, those folks, bringing them in, International Codes Council, National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, U.S. Fire Administration, to kind of really start talking about what are the lessons to be learned, because as much as we'd like to think this will never happen again, I'm afraid it's going to. And so what can we really do to move the needle and make a difference in the future? But as was mentioned in the very beginning, I can't say enough. These gentlemen sitting at this table to my left and the law enforcement officers and the first responders, that we lost 2 lives with the evacuation of about 25,000 people. And that is nothing short of heroic. So my hat's off to all of these folks that did that work. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Now move to Boulder Office of Disaster Management, Director Mike Sharp. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mike Sharp, Director. That day started off in 5 minutes. We'll try to tell you the story here as best we can. But I run the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center. For those that have been around that, there's a lot of different ways you do that. You go to 64 counties, you'll find 64 different capabilities and different ways to do it. Across the nation, even expands more. But our main role here with these gentlemen on my left, they set up the incident command structures. Our job is to deal with consequences of their decisions. So when they pull evacuations and evacuate 25 to 35,000 people, then our EOC has what we call emergency support functions, which is based around the national framework. There's 15 of those emergency support functions. We have 30 here in Boulder because we're Boulder. So we try to be different. The National Weather Service is an ESF in our EOC. They are that important. And we've had the 2013 flood, which was the bullseye was right over Boulder. National Weather Service provided invaluable service, intel, support of many wildfires that we've had, burn scars or burn areas that we deal with. The new flash flooding that changes from 2 inches in an hour to 3/4 of an inch. They are a big part of helping keeping our community safe. And now with fires, they play a vital role. So in that EOC, we are a support coordination center, and we manage things that don't fall into the incident command realm. So transportation, we get buses for people that have mobility challenges with evacuation. We're providing those resources, helping get long-term care facilities dealt with. The chief's EMS chief did a great job supporting the evacuation of Vista Hospital during this. So we had about 6 long-term care facilities that needed to be removed from the fire area, major hospital on top of all the residents, and the challenges were just more than I can count. Our mass care team set up 5 shelters to be able to deal with the messaging that's going out, supporting the work coming from our 911 centers, and that's really kind of what the EOC does until we're relieved of duty and transition into a recovery structure. So many of the things that you see, trying to just collect the thoughts here around what helped us out from the weather service side, is just the invaluable ability to call up and say, hey, I was just looking, I remember talking to Greg's team, and they're saying 8 o'clock tonight. I remember just spending the whole day just going, where in the heck are the hours not going by? Because it felt like an eternity as you're hearing the roof getting ready to blow off the EOC and seeing the smoke. We're kind of in an isolated area back, so we don't have a front line view, but you're watching it going, where's the fire going? What's the impacts to the community? What's the infrastructure impacts? There was water supply issues in Louisville and Superior that came out of this. Heroic efforts there, just from everyone, from community members to public works folks that were going in to try to get water supply that they were having trouble with because homes were burning down. And, supply lines were splitting into homes, so can't go on and on. And we talked about this, but it was a community heroic effort that I appreciate immensely. Been here in this county for 27 years as a resident. I've never seen anything like it. So the things moving forward, this is a game changer event. I hear things about how do we make community preparedness. That's got to be rethought. One of the challenges is how do you get people to understand the risks they live in. Being able to give them real examples or models will be helpful moving forward. We don't have all the answers on that right now, but having those sort of things that we can pull back in with the science community or with NOAA to be able to try to find a new way to explain risk, not just the community, but business owners and policymakers to understand the new world we're in. Mike's point, it's not a one and done. I was here for 4 Mile Fire as the director then, and that was the largest disaster fire in Colorado until we had High Park to the left and Waldo to the south, and now we're back here in the center. So the moving forward piece, the relationships, looking at the way the Weather Service can future help us with prediction models, the preparedness work that needs to be done, looking around how that science can be operationalized, to me is critical. But the one thing that I noticed about this after my 40 years being in public safety is this event had a time compression scale to it that I had never seen before in my career. Things usually moved on an event scale kind of like this. You could have time to regain situational awareness when you lost it, or you were able to kind of move with the disaster as it was unfolding. You could see impacts and kind of lean forward into it. This thing just moved like a rocket ship laterally and it went by you, and if you lost situational awareness, you would have a hard time regaining it, be able to get your footing and your traction. So a lot of things were done intuitively, a lot of things were like gut read, and many times you don't maybe move with it, you're catching up behind it, and then about 6, 7, 8, it seemed like things started to kind of congeal a little bit, and we kind of felt like, okay, we're now getting ahead of this. But that's the piece. So it's that time compression, seeing how the Weather Service and continue to be a great partner, how we can communicate, share our need with them. I would say this in closing, the van driving around with, afterwards doing atmospheric. We were in the recovery part of that. There was huge pressure for getting people back into their home and seeing the damage and starting to take toll and inventory in their life. But then there was all these VOCs and particulate dangers, and you didn't know what all this invisible danger and being able to get information to be able to make decisions around that to start getting the recovery process going was remarkable. So, just having that kind of data being collected and sharing it, it's this continuum that occurs with NOAA, and the weather service I've seen through my disaster management experience over the last 14 years, that from the beginning to the end, you're there, and keep going with the products and the research, because it does offer us tremendous assistance in being able to help make decisions to help get through the response and get the recovery on tracks and moving forward as a community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to invite our law enforcement partners here, both from Louisville and from Boulder County Sheriff's Office, to offer some perspective on the challenges you guys faced as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Hayes. I'm the police chief in Louisville. And, prior to coming to Louisville as the chief, I spent 36 years at the Boulder Police Department and saw fires, floods, riots, and I thought I'd go to Louisville. It was a little quieter. And, as it turns out, this last year has been a big tough year for us. But I had the opportunity, came a little bit early today, saw Mr. Carlos's presentation, also talked with Dave Turner and also Dave Fahey about what you guys can do for us. And I think it's great. It's honorable, behind the scenes. We just need something that kind of bring down to our level. There's certain things that we need to know. We're not as smart as you are, but there are things that you can provide us with, I think, that help us do some more predictions, and some of it's like a crystal ball. But I think there's things that you can do to help us. I applaud your efforts. I don't know most of you, but I do know that most of us know people that were affected by the fire. I know that there's three of us, at least three of us in this room, that lost our houses to the fire. So it's hit home, and at the same time, I want to echo what was said earlier about the heroic efforts of first responders, certainly our firefighters and our officers, both at the sheriff's office and at the Louisville Police Department and others. We've got the body cam videos. We know what kind of efforts they went through in terms of trying to get people out of their homes. And again, we are fortunate, as we know, that we only had a couple of losses of life. But I think we also know that this weather event could have been 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. If that was the case, we would have refrigerated semi-trucks with bodies, and there will be no way to get people out as fast as we did on that afternoon. So again, thank you for your efforts. Try to dumb it up is not the right way to describe it, but give it to us in language that we can understand, that we can apply, and the experts, the firefighter staffs can apply, and our first responders can apply it. In terms of social media and the tweets, I think that's all great. I saw a study that said most people will wait till they get about 3 messages and they decide whether that's real or not. I think all of that is great, but I think one of the things we still have to be concerned about is too many cars, not enough road. We're going to burn people up in their cars. So one of the things we have to get better at, we know in Louisville Police, Louisville Fire, on our end of the county, we have to figure out a way to stagger that. We want to get people out, but if you get them out on foot, there's certainly some danger because they can't outrun the fire. If you get them in cars and there's no place to go, there's a big danger there as well. So somehow over time, at least before I turn it over to Kurt Johnson, we have to get better. We're not going to fix this, but I think there are things we can do to hopefully make the next major fire or wildland fire, which there will be another. We know that. But certainly, I see the scientists across the room. You guys are agreeing. There will be another. We just have to figure out a way to mitigate it the best we can. And again, thank you for your work.
I'm Curtis Johnson. I'm a division chief at the sheriff's office. And as Dave mentioned, this is a bit of a, Chief Beebe especially mentioned, this is a game-changing event for us. We are not used to fire in Boulder County, but most of our fires occur in the western half of Boulder County in the mountainous areas. And we had spent a lot of time and energy planning for and creating awareness and preparedness and mitigation efforts on the western half of the county, never thinking we would see a fire like this in the flat part of our county. As Dave mentioned, our community, I lived in Louisville until the day of the fire. He and I both lost our homes. Never did I think going to work that day that I would come home to a pile of trouble. Because our experience with fire in this community is that we tend to get a handle on it. We
tend to be able to predict a bit better where it's going, how it's behaving, and we are always able to get people out of the way. This was such a fast-moving, freight train of a fire that we really lacked situational awareness of where it was headed, how fast it was going to get there, and how we could get people out of harm's way. In talking with the firefighters who were literally at the front of the fire, the debris flying through the air at 100 miles an hour, flaming tumbleweeds flying over firefighters' heads. We had an employee driving 40 miles an hour and the fire passed them. That was unexpected, previously unlived experience for our community and probably for any community in a fire like this. Moving forward, as Chief Hayes mentioned, we now have to refocus our preparation efforts on a different part of the community. This threat now runs the entire breadth of our county and all the way to the county line in the east. And it's going to take a lot of work to change people's mindset on what the interface with wildfire is now in our county, because it has changed dramatically. As was mentioned earlier, we had another fire that started about an hour prior to this one on the north side of the county. Different agricultural conditions led to that fire being able to be stopped. Had it not been stopped, there was modeling that it could have been very similar and headed out towards Niwot and Longmont, and it been devastating to those communities. So we were fortunate in that case, not fortunate on the south end. We're already doing a ton of work. We understand that notification systems can be a challenge. Our best offense in evacuating people is human beings. We deployed about 100 deputies to literally knock on doors and get people out of their homes ahead of the fire. And oftentimes that was within seconds or minutes of the fire. We have vehicles with melted bumpers and employees who were injured evacuating people because they were that close to the fire trying to save lives and save animals. Future for us is advancing our notification systems, alert and warning, how we can do that better. But we have to be very strategic and balanced with those efforts because, as Chief Hayes mentioned, we don't have enough roads to move 30,000 people out of communities. And mass notification creates chaos in evacuation, creates a challenge for us to strategically get people out of harm's way without creating gridlock and not having to have people directing traffic at every intersection when we're just trying to save lives and knock on doors. It was a challenging day for all of us, but absolutely a learning moment that everyone to my right, we've already met multiple times, that are committed to continuing the work, making sure that we are as prepared as we can be as a community, that we can leverage all the technology available to us, prepare ourselves, and we look to you for the science side of that. The weather information is always useful to you. Put up from the sheriff's office, we tweet that all the time when there's a red flag or bands. But reframing the culture in our community about how fire looks and how it acts and where it can be, where it can go and how quickly it can get there, it's going to take us the next year to overcome and accomplish. We're committed to that work.
Great, thank you everyone for sort of kicking things off here. I'm going to turn it over to sort of our members to kick off the discussion, and anyone at the table here, including our mayors and commissioners who were able to be here today, please feel free to sort of chime in. So turn it over for.
Thanks. So I'll start. I'm Ed Perlmutter. I represent south of here, and I just want to thank my colleagues, Don Norcross from New Jersey for joining us, and Jerry McNerney from California joining us, and obviously Joe hosting us up here. So I guess my question to both the scientists and to the responders is, last week you got another chance to see if you learned anything with the NCAR fire. So I'm just curious, both in terms of, because you had to evacuate a lot of people last week. So in terms of the ability to present, meteorological data or, just warnings, how did that work? And then how were you able to respond and stop this thing? Did you feel like you made progress since Marshall Fire? I guess that's my question. So I start with the folks from NOAA and the Weather Service. Yeah, I don't know.
So the weather conditions for that particular fire were much different. We had still quite gusty winds right along the front range where the fire was located. We had similar staffing as we do for every event and trying to send out information just the same way, providing spot forecasts and weather information to Boulder County Sheriff's Office or spots as they come in through the website. So for us, really, delivering the same level of service, no matter what type of fire it is, no matter what type of weather event it was. But I would say during the Marshall Fire, the weather conditions were just so extreme and a little more difficult to forecast. So our services continue throughout, no matter what.
It never got to a level where you sent out some of those dire tweets.
No. And we could see it here from the building again. And we honestly were not overly concerned about it spreading towards the campus or in the area, but we were trying to concentrate on giving the best forecast that we could to the people that were fighting the fire so we could hopefully get it contained and stopped before it spread further.
So from the city of Boulder's perspective, I agree, the weather definitely helped us this time. Very, very different situation. But the predictions were extremely helpful because at the start of our shift that morning, my team actually ends up being the incident commanders in a lot of fires in the region. And so they routinely send out information to the crews if they think a weather forecast is going to be right for a wildfire. And so our crews were already ready. We cross-staff certain types of wildfire apparatus. And so that morning, they actually told the crews, be ready. This could actually be the kind of conditions where we see trouble. And sure enough, with the start of the fire, we were worried for the city of Boulder. There were some vulnerable spots there, but the weather was good enough to allow for air assets to also help us anchor some of the groundwork. So we did have a lot of crews we were able to done really quickly that were already ready to go. We did learn from the NCAR fire as a group of chiefs that we need to start surging more. So when there are predictions, we're starting now to actively staff up in case of a wildfire so that we can dump resources very quickly. The other advantage to this fire, obviously, is it wasn't a region-wide event. There was plenty of wind, but not everybody was experiencing the same stress. So I was able to get a lot of resources in on this fire very quickly to that spot. And it's right in a couple of areas, and we were even able to get firefighters in the threatened area south, which is an entirely different district, but I was able to protect that area as well, even though it was well far south from where the fire eventually ended up stopping. But I think a lot of things played a positive, luck played a big part. I do want to say that the weather was helpful, but we have learned to surge, and the weather predictions have really helped us to make some of those decisions on the ground day to day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry McNerney. I represent a district in Northern California, and we've had some very tragic fires, the Paradise Fire, the Sonoma Fire. And in those cases, specifically Paradise, the event happened in the middle of the night, so it was difficult to get people the word. Now, as a result of that, I'm on the committee of jurisdiction that has telecommunications. We passed laws requiring cellular providers to provide emergency notification on your cell phone, whether it's turned on or off. In an emergency situation, that's one thing we've done. We required cell towers to build in fire resilience and redundancy, so there'll be communication available when this is built out. We provided funding for fire risk mitigation. And lastly, of course, I want to mention we need to take some severe steps for climate action, and that hasn't happened yet. It's really a shame that's on us. So my question then is, what else can we do? What ideas do you have that we can do in Washington on a national level? Because fires are going to happen in Colorado, they're happening in New Mexico, they're going to happen in California. Fire season hasn't really started yet, but it's going to. So what else is there along those lines that we could do that would be helpful? Thank you.
Hi, Clint Folsom, Mayor, Town of Superior, and we first I want to thank our local, state, and federal delegation for all their help and assistance throughout this event. You know, as we start the recovery and the rebuild process, we're meeting in our town board trying to come up with building code changes and things to make houses safer in the rebuild. But in reality, that's just kind of a patchwork of homes that are going to be rebuilt. You've got all of the existing homes throughout the country that are that have conditions that kind of led to greater spread of fire. So I think a wider education around things not to have right next to your house, just better fire resistant practices that everyone can do, because as much as we prepare in Superior and Louisville and everywhere else, most likely this large scale event is going to happen somewhere else, and they're not expecting it like we weren't expecting it. So I think a wider scale education around just being fire aware, and you've got conditions of wind and dryness and fires introduced, this could absolutely happen in everyone's community as well.
Thank you, Mayor Folsom. I'm Mayor Stoltzman from Louisville. We're neighboring jurisdictions, and I really appreciate the question. You understand exactly the scope of the problem representing Paradise, and Paradise has been very supportive and helpful to us. And Congressman News understands representing us, but I think what you said for us not to ask for is exactly what we need. We need you to take climate action. Like, this is going to continue to happen at a rate that is just totally unacceptable. And what happens then is the cost is very great, and the federal government comes to help pay some of the cost, but there's such a huge unmet need. So taking climate action is what we need. If you could bring as many people here, I'm happy to show as many different members of Congress the area and talk to them about the issues and show them what we're going through to help them understand. They can stay in my guest bedroom. Anything we can do really to take climate action. It's incredibly important, right? Beyond that, there are things we need to do to recover because of the climate disaster. And so everything else is just, you're not actually dealing with the cause of the issue. So we need more financial support. And why do we need more financial support? Because our insurance system is not structured in a way that protects homeowners and consumers. So at the end of the day, the federal government is paying because we have a system that doesn't protect consumers, and is paying because of our inaction for taking for working on reducing carbon emissions. And so they're all federal matters, even though many of them have now been pushed down to the state and local level. And we will keep working our tails off at the local level to do everything we can to support you in being successful. But the more things we could do collectively as a nation, the better off we'll be, because this is a problem in scale that will take global action.
Any questions?
I do one comment if I can, real quick. To your point around the wireless emergency alerts, there is some action back in DC that can be helpful. We're part of one of 4 counties right now that is putting together a consensus report. The FCC has recently put a notice for comment out related to how to make or improve the wireless emergency alert or iPod system, that is the integrated public alert warning system. As you heard the chief talk about, that strategic ability to geolocate the warnings or the evacuations is critical. And I think it's a different environment here than perhaps in like a hurricane environment, where you're blasting out mass notifications arriving in 3 days, and the Weather Service has a time scale that can predict that, where we're doing this in an hour, 45 minutes. Being able to get those wireless alerts to be more geocentric, so that they're reliable, and the strategies that police and firefighters are making to evacuate communities is helpful. Right now, we've had 3 other fires in Boulder County that have used our wireless emergency alert system. That's been improved since we didn't have it in place, Marshall, and we put the entire, it leads all over the county. It's gone all over the place. And then if we use the NOAA weather radio, there was some issues around that being grabbed by apps, weather apps, and putting the entire county under evacuation notice. That's how it came across. And smart cars driving into the window with the wires where it says evacuate now. So there's all these things we're discovering that are just part of this, using this tool. So it's just anything we can do to improve that system, to narrow it down, will be very, very helpful for local communities that are having to evacuate large areas in short periods of time.
I'll add one more thing. So I don't want to steal the thunder of the Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks to my left here, so if he wants to jump in, he can. But the other thing that helped us on the NCAR fire that I think our local elected officials have pointed out as well is being able to perform preventative activities in the newly defined urban interface is important. That obviously takes funding and money, and open space has spent a considerable amount of money, time, and effort along with us to help mitigate areas near the NCAR fire, all around it actually. And so that actually helped us in this fire because the fire ended up hitting previously mitigated work. And we did joke about it, but it's kind of true that the fire turned out to be the best non-prescribed burn in that area. We really, it did everything you would do if you could have planned for it without hitting any structures or anything. So that's the kind of work that we need to be able to do more of, and certainly with individual homeowners as well.
Down Norcross from New Jersey, we had Pine Barrens, a little bit different. It's a renewing, that's how they drop your seeds, but they have been out of control several times. And the comment I heard about building codes is extremely important. We could have gone back 30 years and different changes we've made in our code. We just said, well, we already built our homes. We would be in the same spot today. There are retrofits, and the number one way for this to move as a fire is your roof. People put roofs on 20 years apart, so there is plenty of opportunity. But as a public official from a local community, changing codes is not always popular. I'd like to hear from you. Have you looked into the codes? There's a number of places around the country that have changed that. Every year that goes by, that does it.
We're looking forward to this answer.
My name is Matt Jones. I'm a Boulder County Commissioner. I'm a very lucky Louisville resident. Just, very thankful we have to replace the added insulation, but compared to others, it's nothing. And also I want to mention, thanks for mentioning the forest mitigation work that went on in Shanahan Ridge. Being on a holding crew, prescribed fire about 20 years ago up there. And I talked to Chris Wanner from MP, and he told me it was that, cattle grazing to drop the grass load, and also a seed bomber coming through, laying a line. So that's so critical, and we do need more money, lots and lots of money. The state, I used to be in the state senate and state house, and we've been working to try to increase that with some success. And the federal money coming in under the infrastructure bill is much appreciated. But to do the top 10% in Colorado of highest risk areas, it will take $100 million over 20 years. And we get about 24, which we're very thankful for. We've increased, and Mike Morgan's helped us do that. Thank you. So we need a lot more money for that. And I think all these scientists here, I feel like I have a responsibility to say what we need. There's a lot of work going on around that kind of work. More would be helpful, I think, as to how to do the thing and prescribe burns. A lot of people, there's different points of view on how that works, and so that's one of the science. But to the code issue, we in Boulder County have a strong WUI code, Wetland Urban Interface Code, to the west in the mountains. We are now in the process of moving to the east. If you look at the State Forest Service risk map, the part by Marshall Reservoir to Superior is bright red. It is the highest risk area. Same is true north of Boulder towards Longmont. And so we're putting our code in place almost identical to what it is in the west. on the east side, a little bit less defensible space. That's about the difference of it. Nothing within 3 foot of the house is combustible. And that's for the unincorporated area. We've also been working at the state trying to get a statewide code. Director Morgan, I'm looking forward to an amendment. I testified on a bill just today, talking that up. But what I will never forget, we had a town hall with people in the unincorporated area who lost their homes, the fire survivors. By the way, that's the right term. As a double cancer survivor, that's the right term. It feels somehow weirdly similar to that. But I will never forget when we asked those residents, should we put a stronger buoy code in place? Which, by the way, the research shows so far doesn't cost any more or slightly more, if anything. And every person said yes that spoke up. And one guy said, I don't want to lose my house again. That's the cheapest thing we can do, be preventive and get ahead of it. So climate change work from the pollution level is important, but I think climate adaptation, that's what this is so critical. And we're going to vote in a week to put that code into place. But the other thing that struck me about that is I talked to some firefighters from Louisville Fire and Mountain View, and they both kind of said the same thing, that when they were trying to fight the fire in Louisville, they had a hard time getting ahead of it. And one engine had to leave to get water and came back and advanced 4 houses. But if their construction is more ignition resistant, that helps firefighters and keeps firefighters safer. I mean, it's a win-win-win-win, right? So you're right, we need to do all these things. And the last thing I'll end with is we need to change people's views in the Front Range about this. California, same thing. We're learning from you. Your fires are bigger than ours, and we're all kind of getting along with this. But we got to change people's attitudes. I used to say I work on forest health mitigation work when I was in the State House because I think it's important. It'll never happen in my community. I went through the 5 stages of acceptance on that fire about an evacuation notice in about 20 minutes. Sheriff Pelly called me about the fire. I went and looked because I have to go look. I went up on David's Mesa. I had never seen such a flat plume in my life. So I go home to an area that burned later. And my wife calls on the phone and says, we have an evacuation notice. And that was hard for me to believe. So we need to change people's beliefs and attitudes around this so that they do the home work and keep things 3 feet from their house, that kind of thing. So they do put the class of, well, you have to put class A roof on it anyway because of code, but they do all those things. And having a go bag, I remember looking at lists of go bags and thinking I'll never have to worry about that. Now I do. So it's a new reality for all of us, and it's county-wide. The modeling was mentioned earlier showed that county, that fire north of Boulder, had it gone, would have got through Longmont. So that's our reality now. So that social science side of things, of getting people aware and acceptance, stuff like Tony Chang does, is going to be so critical.
I'll just add on the question of code time. Aaron Brockett, I'm the mayor of the city of Boulder. We did actually impose a requirement for fire-resistant roofs, and not just for new construction, but with a retrofit requirement. And Mike, could you speak to the details on that? Because I think it takes some political will to require refits, but this is something that we did.
Yes, this was not without a lot of controversy at the time. This was back in 90, probably 93, 94. And Boulder's approach to it was, well, not only new construction, but we're going to retroactively apply it, but we will give you 20 years to comply. So by January of 2014, every building in the city had to have their homes retrofitted with non-wood roofs, 50% or less. So that's probably something that's fairly unique to Boulder along the Front Range in terms of having the political will to push that forward retroactively.
just a couple of observations, I guess. First and foremost, note of gratitude to my colleagues for traveling across the country to visit Boulder and Golden and the entire Front Range over the course of the last few days. And I think in particular to Mayor Stoltzman, her really important point regarding kind of the underlying disease of climate change as opposed to the symptoms in terms of the pervasive wildfires. I will just assure you and of course all the scientists here that Representative Norcross and Representative McNerney, I think both share a real commitment to climate action, and they live that every day in the legislation that they've pursued. In Washington, I suspect born from the fact that they represent communities that are experiencing the impacts of climate change in a real visceral way, whether it's in New Jersey and the devastating hurricanes on our eastern seaboard, or of course, Paradise and some of the devastating fires in California. So just thank you both for coming. And of course, to my friend, Representative Perlmutter for encouraging the committee and hosting over the course of the last few days. I also would say I think you've gotten a good sense, I hope, of kind of the best of the best. And this is a great culmination of I know there's some activities tomorrow, but of the Science Committee's field trip over the course of the last several days in terms of both the best of the best in law enforcement. I mean, people who were out there literally working around the clock to save lives, save properties, save homes, save our communities, while they themselves were losing their homes. They would learn later that evening. And then, of course, the best of the best in terms of our scientists and our researchers, our practitioners, not just here, of course, at NOAA, although it's fitting that we're ending here, but at all the facilities that we saw over the course of the last few days. Two takeaways for me that I just found interesting. One, it was one of our chiefs who mentioned this. I think it'd be interesting to get, and I know that NOAA and the panoply of federal aid labs that we have here in our district have this capability to get enhanced modeling to share with our neighbors to the south. So in Arvada, in Golden, in Highlands Ranch, in Morrison, in Ken Carroll, the vast majority of whom, Colorado Springs, I mean, the vast majority of whom I still think today don't necessarily recognize the urgency of the threat that faces them, because ultimately what happened in Louisville and Superior could just as easily happen to any of those communities, and likely will at some point in the not so distant future. And so, you know, and one would hope that the consequences of the Marshall Fire would be sort of a wake-up call enough, but it may be that some modeling, I think, might be really instructive and informative to help our neighbors and the residents across the Front Range better understand that threat. The vast majority of people in Arvada, I mean, Ed can speak to this, I don't think have a firebox. They don't have a go bag, as Commissioner Jones put it. I didn't in Lafayette. We live here in this community. And so having that base of knowledge, I think, would be really important. The second point, and perhaps the last one, the NWS, of course, has been so pivotal time and time again. And the same could be said of course, the hours before the Marshall Fire. But I think the chief in Louisville noted this. If there's a slide that you started off with, and I think it was at 3:40 in the morning. I don't know if you can pull it up. I don't know if other folks saw this. There's a message that one of your meteorologists sent out that said, I can't ignore what I am seeing. And for me, I just would say, as someone who was here that day on December 30th, and I can remember talking to Mayor Stoltzman at 12 o'clock, at 12:30, after we knew that the fire had begun to kind of encroach into Superior, but still not fully, I think, understanding that this was a fire that was going to force the evacuation of 30,000 people. Clearly, the folks here at NWS, they saw something that evening before in the wee hours of the night, and I'm not sure that same level of urgency was conveyed, perhaps, and I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but more in the sense of finding out or trying to ascertain more effective ways that sense of urgency can be relayed back to the broader populations along this expanded WUI, I would think would be a really important thing for us to, that's the message that I was thinking about. I wish I had, of course, I'm not suggesting that should be shared with, the entire public in real time, but boy, had I known this morning, the morning of December 30th, that there was a meteorologist here at NWS in Boulder writing that. I think, I mean, who's to say, again, there were so many issues outside of our control and the confluence of, this is not a fire that you could necessarily, contain or do traditional fire lines, that sort of thing. But anyway, I just think it's really informative. That being said, we have, my most important constituent here, which is our governor. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to the governor.
Well, the current congressman is so much better than the one he took the place of. Welcome, Congressman McNerney, Congressman Norcross. It is great to see you here in Colorado. And we appreciate the Science Committee really rolling up their sleeves. And I think I'm going to be joining you. We're going from here to Sagamore Development completely wiped out. Had you been there December 29th, nice suburban subdevelopment, kids in the driveways, families returning from work, and that subdevelopment, every home was destroyed. There's others where the majority were. Old Town Superior was wiped out. And I think, as you saw when this was, in the headlines, that this could be really anywhere USA, especially anywhere in kind of the dry arid West. It could be, and of course, Congressman McNerney, you're no stranger to fires in California, in your area, Idaho, Oregon, New Mexico now is experiencing fires. It's not a question of if for us, it's a question of when. And I think that the big, who would have even thought the most destructive fire in the history of our state would be at the end of December. We used to think in terms of fire seasons here. We had the 3 largest wildfires in the history of our city in the summer of 2020, and they extended well into what we would consider fall and outside of the normal flower season, and now the most destructive at the end of December. So the sad reality is we're really transitioning to prepare for year-round response rather than fire season. And of course, some is on the response side, preparedness, equipment. The state is certainly stepping up. President Biden convened a summit of the governors in areas where we experienced fires to up the bar on the federal response. But it's also about mitigation and resiliency, because I think one thing we want to point out about this particular fire, we had 105-mile-an-hour gusts that day. There was no innovation of humanity that could intervene. We couldn't fly aircraft, we couldn't fly helicopters, we couldn't fly tankers. What it made a difference and is community perimeter defense, home perimeter defense. In fact, what saved many of the commercial properties is their inadvertent perimeter defense, otherwise known as parking lots, frankly, is what saved many of the commercial properties with large areas with no fuel. And we need to be thoughtful about that kind of preparation on in the, again, we traditionally call it wildland-urban interface, but this is more of the kind of inner suburban connectivity, open space, backyards, suburban homes. There's a lot of fuel that is there in every subdevelopment. So that's why we're taking action at the state level. We're expanding our capacity to fight fires, our mitigation efforts, looking at our building codes. It's about getting to the root causes. Obviously, many of these fires, the word is now in this one, but at least two of our three of the largest fires in 2020 human caused. So it's also about better education and outreach around everything from chains on tires, camping activities, et cetera, backyard barbecues on days which you should not, when there's 105-mile gusts, you shouldn't be doing. So a lot of this work, because in addition, there's several trends that are leading to this. We've of course talked about, and you have, and you're focused on the impact of climate change, hotter, drier, longer season, also increased population and increased utilization of our open spaces and wildlands. So it's really both of those as our population continues to increase, utilization of lands increase, coupled with the changing climate really lead to this year-round risk. So I want to thank you for really rolling up your sleeves. The state of Colorado cannot do this itself. Even the state of California, a much bigger state, cannot do this itself. This is what our federal government is for. And having that interstate capacity is absolutely critical. The state funding is stepping up. We're increasing our aerial response capabilities. another contracting for another large air tanker this year. We're able to invest in improved dispatch for more rapid response. I know that when I came in, Congressman Goose was making related comments. We are thrilled in AmeriCorps, another federal program, to house a Colorado Climate Corps. And we also, through our Department of Corrections, have a state wildland inmate fire crew. Even as we speak, we're looking into whether we can use them on an interstate basis, for instance, in New Mexico. And so that's something where the federal government might also be able to help if we're going to be using, and again, increasing capacity and using interstate inmate fire crews. But while we're proud of the state level work, I want to thank Congressman Perlmutter and Congressman Magoo's for the national work across different committees, right? I mean, this is a appropriations issue. This is a Department of Natural Resources issue. It's a Department of Agricultural issue with U.S. Forest Service land. Of course, a Science Committee issue. And a Special Committee on Climate issue. This is an issue that really goes across a number of different committees. And I think in particular, the Science Committee showing that leadership with science-driven response and data to inform the work of the other committees is also particularly important. And I want to thank you for visiting Colorado.
Jeff, what's the timing here?
We're going to wrap up.
Yeah, so I just want to thank NOAA and the Weather Service for hosting us today. And I want to give you all a chance, if you had any kind of concluding thoughts, to give you a chance to say something. But, you know, as Jared was saying, Joe, the rest of us, members of Congress, the governor, we just thank you and all the first responders and to the elected officials for serving our state, serving our nation. But I'd like to turn it over, Jennifer, if you've got something.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And I too would like to say thank you to our community, or to, you know, all of our first responders. I live in Louisville as well, and what you did on that day was heroic. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. I did want to go back to Congressman Magoo's question about what can we do in talking about modeling. You know, we need high resolution modeling and observations at those high resolutions so that we can give this information on timescales to make the decisions we need to make to get people out of the way and give lead time with respect to that. And I just want to throw in one more point. It comes down to also having the compute power to make all of that happen. Without that computing power, and we have an amazing system in the basement of this building, that's really, really important to make those high resolution models run so that we can give it to the forecast office to make those decisions. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to follow up on her point, I mean, Chief Wilson made a good point. He didn't know when the winds were going to stop that evening. We have ensemble forecast systems that would give much more probabilistic information and guidance, but that requires exactly the high performance computing that Jim was talking about. And so we're unable to, we need the high performance computing both in the operational National Weather Service sense, but we absolutely need it in the development sense so we can develop the next generation of tools that we can get into your hands.
And I'd like to take a moment to just recognize if our staff would, if you guys would stand, they've put together a trip for us. You know, Colorado, we enjoy one of the best scientific communities anywhere in the country, in terms of aerospace, in terms of our national labs, in terms of our universities and our institutions of higher education. And I have been bragging about Colorado for a very long time and wanted to get the Science Committee out here to see the kinds of excellence and the kinds of talent that we all enjoy. And as Joe was saying, you're among our best and brightest, and we're just happy that you hosted us today. So we're going to take up, Matt, you should know, wildfire bills. Dick, when are we taking up the wildfire bills? The next few weeks, the next couple of weeks, we have a number of wildfire pieces of legislation, one specifically that comes out of the Science Committee. And we will make sure that you all have a draft of what we're going to do, and anything that you think we may need to add, we'd be happy to take a look at that. So, thank you all. We've got, oh, Jerry.